When Ivy moved into the house on Oak Ridge Lane, she wasn't worried about new bedrooms or sharing her toys. What unsettled her most was the dog. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick coat of sable fur and golden eyes that never blinked. His name was Coda, and he belonged to her mother's new husband, Ryan. Coda didn't bark. He didn't run to the door like other dogs. He didn't sniff hands or wag his tail or beg for food. He just watched, especially when Ivy was in the high room. Always from a distance, always in total silence. And to a 6-year-old with a big imagination, it didn't feel like watching. It felt like judging. Ivy tried to be brave. She'd walk through the hallway even when he lay stretched across it. She never screamed or ran or tried to poke him. But still, Coda never approached her. When she dropped a toy, he didn't flinch. When she offered him a cracker, he turned away. If she laughed too loud, he got up and left the room. And each time, Ivy shrank a little more inside herself. Mira, her mother, tried to explain. "He's not mean, sweetheart. He's just careful. He wasn't raised around kids. He doesn't know what to do with all your energy yet. But he doesn't like me," Ivy whispered once, curling into her mom's lap. Mira kissed her forehead. "That's not true. Coda's just waiting to understand you." But even Mira seemed unsure. She never left them alone together, never encouraged Ivy to feed him. And more than once, Ivy overheard her whispering to Ryan, "He's gentle with us, I know, but Ivy's just a child. If he doesn't adjust, we may have to think about other options." Ryan always responded quietly, "He's been through a lot. Just give him time." And time passed. Weeks came and went, and nothing changed. Coda remained a statue in the corner of their new life. Not threatening, not friendly, just still. Ivy started avoiding the rooms he liked. She tiptoed around the kitchen if he was, lying by the fridge. She wouldn't sit on the living room rug if he was already on it. She missed playing freely, missed feeling like she belonged. And then, everything changed in the span of 6 seconds. It was a Sunday, the kind with no plans. Bright sun, and a breeze light enough to carry bubbles across the yard. Mira was folding laundry upstairs. Ryan was fixing the shed door. Ivy was playing on the back porch, spinning in circles with her arms wide and hair flying, chasing her shadow and laughing to herself. Coda lay at the top of the steps, half asleep, ears twitching but eyes closed. The accident happened so fast, even Ivy didn't realize what went wrong. Her foot slipped on a puddle from the morning hose. Her legs flew out from under her. She tumbled down the steps and landed face first on the brick walkway. Her scream pierced the quiet afternoon, high and sharp and panicked. Mira dropped the Gio laundry basket. Ryan came running, but Coda was the first to move. Before Mira had even reached the window, he was already off the steps, paws pounding the stone. Ivy lay curled up, sobbing, one hand pressed to her scraped cheek, blood already smudged across her chin. Coda didn't bark, didn't panic. He moved beside her, lowered his body close and gently nudged his nose under her shoulder. He lay down and stayed absolutely still, head beside hers, body shielding her from the sun, breath warm and steady on her cheek. Mira froze in the doorway, heart hammering. "Coda!" But Ivy wasn't afraid. Through her tears, she reached out and touched his ear, and Coda didn't pull away. He didn't even blink. He just stayed, guarding. Ryan scooped Ivy up and carried her inside, and Coda followed close behind, never more than 2 steps away. At the bathroom door, he waited. When Mira applied ointment and bandaged her chin, Ivy didn't flinch. She only asked once, "Is Coda still outside?" "Yes," Mira said softly. "He hasn't moved." When Ivy stepped out, her shirt stained with blood and her face freshly cleaned, Coda stood, slowly, gently, and walked toward her. She reached out her hand, unsure. Coda pressed his nose against her palm. Then, for the first time since she'd met him, he wagged his tail, only once. But it was enough to erase everything Ivy had feared. Enough to tell her that Coda didn't hate kids. He wasn't waiting to push her away. He'd been waiting for the moment to matter, and now he'd found it. The dog who had never barked, never played, never shown affection, had moved like lightning the moment she cried, and everything Ivy thought she knew about him was about to change forever. For the rest of that day, Coda didn't leave Ivy's side. Wherever she sat, he laid down next to her. If she shifted, he adjusted. When she whimpered softly, while Mira cleaned the cut on her chin, Coda pressed his head gently against her arm, grounding her with a presence stronger than any words could offer. And for the first time since they'd moved in, Ivy didn't flinch when he came near. She didn't shrink back. She leaned into him like he was something safe. Mira noticed the change immediately. There was no tension in Ivy's shoulders now. When Coda entered the room, no hesitation in her movements. At bedtime, Ivy whispered, "Can he stay in my room tonight?" And without missing a beat, Mira nodded. She placed a blanket on the floor beside Ivy's bed, expecting Coda to curl up there. But once the light clicked off and the silence settled in, Coda stood, padded over to the side of the bed, and rested his chin on the mattress beside Ivy's hand. And that's how he stayed, until morning. The next few days unfolded like something. Inside, Coda had been rewired, or maybe just unlocked. He followed Ivy around the house, slow and steady, never in her way but never far. When she played with her dolls on the rug, he lay next to her, eyes half closed but always watching. When she laughed, he wagged his tail. When she tripped over her shoelaces on the back patio, he stepped beside her, waiting calmly for her to stand. There was no dramatic shift, no movie moment montage, just quiet, reliable closeness, the kind of trust that builds without announcements. Mira kept her distance at first, observing. She had always been cautious when it came to dogs, especially one like Coda with such a rigid past. But there was no denying what she saw now. Ivy was lighter, happier, and Coda had found his rhythm. It wasn't about obedience or tricks. It was something deeper. He was sinking himself to the heartbeat of a little girl who had once been terrified to pass him in the hallway. Then came the night that revealed how much deeper this bond had grown. It was nearly midnight when the first scream tore through the house. Mira jolted out of bed, heart pounding, feet flying across the hall. She flung Ivy's door open just as her daughter shot upright, face slick with sweat, breath hiccuping through tears. But Mira wasn't the first one to reach her. Coda was already there. He had burst through the cracked door the moment Ivy cried out. He stood at the side of the bed, posture still but alert, eyes locked on Ivy as she trembled and tried to speak. Mira rushed over and wrapped her arms around her daughter, whispering, "It's okay. It's okay. I'm here. It was just a dream." Ivy clung to her, shaking. "I was falling again," she choked. "From the porch, but no one came. No one saw." Mira pulled her closer, rocking slightly. And then Coda did something that shattered every idea she'd ever had about him. He climbed onto the bed, not with force, not with any sudden movement, but slowly, carefully, placing his front paws beside Ivy's legs and nudging her gently with his nose. Ivy looked at him through tears, blinked, and then reached for him. She pressed her head against his shoulder, wrapping her arms as far around his neck as they could go. He lowered himself down, curling beside her as if to shield her from the world. Mira stepped back, silent, heart in her throat. She didn't need to say anything. The moment had said everything. Ivy didn't have another nightmare that night. From then on, Coda became part of the routine. He sat by the tub while Ivy bathed, walked beside her on every trip to the park, and even laid next to her during story time, eyes closing gently as Mira read aloud. What had started as a cautious coexistence had become a quiet, unshakable loyalty. But not everyone believed the story. When Mira shared a photo online, one where Ivy lay asleep with Coda curled around her, like a sentry, it spread quickly. Friends and strangers alike commented, most in awe of the transformation, but some were skeptical. One message stood out, "That's dangerous. Dogs like that can snap. You're lucky he hasn't." Mira read the comment twice, then deleted it, because that person hadn't seen the way Coda watched Ivy cross the street. Hadn't seen the way he positioned himself between her and the edge of the porch every time they played outside. Hadn't seen the way his body shifted the second Ivy's laugh turned into a cry, or how he never took his eyes off her when she was near strangers. They didn't know what it looked like when a dog went from misunderstood to guardian, but Mira did, and so did Ivy. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the curtains and Ivy colored at the kitchen table, she looked up and said simply, "I don't think Coda ever hated me, Mommy. I think he was just waiting for—" "What?" Mira asked. Ivy smiled softly, not looking up from her drawing. "For me to need him." And Mira couldn't argue with that, because the dog who had once stood still like a shadow now moved through their lives like light, quiet, constant, and always exactly where he needed to be. For the first time since they moved in, Ivy wasn't just adjusting, she was thriving. Mornings began with Coda nosing at her blanket, and ended with him curled like a watchful crescent at the foot of her bed. Where there had once been hesitation, now there was trust. Ivy talked to him like a best friend. She confided in him. She read him her spelling words and whispered secrets into the thick fur behind his ear. He listened to it all in perfect silence. And somewhere between all those quiet moments, Ivy began to feel safe, not just in the house, but in her own skin. Mira noticed the shift more than anyone. Ivy, once shy and careful, was now bold, more vocal. She didn't flinch at sudden sounds or check behind her shoulder in unfamiliar rooms. She smiled wider, laughed louder. Mira watched her from the doorway one afternoon as Ivy danced barefoot in the living room, music playing softly, Coda sitting like a statue in the corner, but with his tail thumping every few seconds like a slow, steady drum. She reached for her phone to take a photo but stopped herself. Some moments didn't need documenting. Some were too sacred for screens. Then came the incident at the farmer's market. It was a Saturday morning, warm and busy, with the smell of kettle corn and fresh fruit filling the air. Ivy held Mira's hand with one arm and Coda's leash with the other. He walked calmly beside her, perfectly in step, drawing quiet admiration from passers-by. One vendor leaned over and whispered, "That's a fine dog you've got there." Ivy beamed. They were only steps from the lemonade stand when it happened. A man pushing a heavy cart lost his grip. It rolled downhill too fast, veered to the right, and came barreling toward the walkway, toward Ivy. Mira was half a second too slow. She shouted her daughter's name and reached out, heart flying to her throat. But before she could react, Coda moved. He launched sideways, not into the cart, but into Ivy, nudging her hard enough to knock her off balance. She tumbled into the grass, safe. Coda spun to face the cart, placing his body between her and the metal. It missed him by inches, slammed into a post and stopped. People screamed. The man chased after his cart, apologizing breathlessly. Mira rushed to Ivy, who sat up stunned but unhurt. But all eyes were on Coda. He stood, still and steady, facing the twisted wreckage, as if it had been a threat he'd already prepared for. Only when Ivy crawled over to him and wrapped her arms around his chest did he relax, his head lowering slightly, his tail swaying gently through the grass. Paramedics checked Ivy even though she insisted she was fine. Vendors surrounded Mira, offering water and reassurance. And while everyone talked, one woman recorded a clip of Ivy hugging Coda while the wrecked cart lay in the background. She uploaded it later that day with the caption, "He didn't hesitate, he just protected her." The video went viral within hours. News outlets reached out. Animal behaviorists commented. Strangers flooded Mira's inbox with messages about courage and instinct, calling Coda everything from guardian angel to miracle dog. One woman wrote, "I used to fear my own rescue dog, but after seeing this, maybe I need to give her a real chance." At first, Mira was hesitant. They hadn't asked for attention. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized Coda's story wasn't just theirs anymore. It was one that might change how people saw quiet dogs. Misunderstood. Dogs. Dogs who waited in the corner, not because they didn't care, but because they were waiting for the moment to show just how deeply they did. The following week, they were invited to a community event at the local elementary school, a program focused on kindness, bravery, and the bond between animals and children. Mira asked Ivy if she wanted to speak. The little girl paused, then nodded. That Friday, Ivy stood in front of 24 children, her hands shaking a little, with Coda sitting calmly at her side. "I used to think Coda didn't like me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "He didn't play. He didn't come near me. I thought I did something wrong, but really, he was just watching, waiting. And when I needed him, when I really needed him, he was there, every time." Coda didn't react to the applause, but afterward, he let every child touch him, let them run their fingers through his coat, let them hug him without flinching. And Ivy stood beside him the whole time, her hand resting gently on his collar like it had always belonged there. Later that night, Mira found a drawing on Ivy's nightstand, a crayon version of the farmer's market, with the cart, the crowd, and a big bold Coda standing in front of a tiny figure with brown pigtails. At the top, in shaky handwriting, Ivy had written, "The dog who waited and then saved." Mira smiled and traced her fingers over the paper. She turned to Coda, lying on the rug beside Ivy's bed, eyes already closed, chest rising slow and steady. He hadn't needed to bark. He hadn't needed to be loud or playful or eager to please. He just needed someone to see him. And now, he'd made sure the world never forgot what quiet loyalty looked like when it finally found its voice. The weeks that followed were filled with invitations. Local news crews wanted interviews. Families at the school invited Ivy and Coda to birthday parties and playdates. One children's book author even reached out, hoping to write a short story inspired by their bond. But through all the noise, all the flashing cameras and attention, Coda never changed. He still woke up before anyone else and waited patiently by Ivy's door. He still refused to eat until she was at the table. He still curled up quietly beside her each night, like the entire world narrowed to the rise and fall of her breath. But something began to shift. Coda started showing signs of restlessness, not the kind born from energy, but from memory. On more than one night, Mira found him standing by the front door long after the house was asleep, unmoving, just staring out into the dark, as if he were waiting for a command no one had spoken. Sometimes he'd walk the perimeter of the house after everyone had gone to bed, then return to Ivy's room, lay down, and sigh like he was trying to put something behind him but couldn't. Mira brought it up one night after Ivy had fallen asleep. "He's not unsettled," Ryan said, watching Coda from the porch as the dog circled once more before settling under the old maple tree. "He's trained. You can take a dog out of service, but you can't always take the service out of the dog." "But he's not a soldier anymore," Mira whispered. "He's just supposed to be a dog now." Ryan smiled sadly. "Try telling him that." The next morning a package arrived. It was from a woman named Eliza Rowe, Sergeant Eliza Rowe, who had served in the same unit Coda had once been part of. Mira had reached out to her weeks ago when she found Coda's old military paperwork tucked into a file folder Ryan hadn't opened in years. Eliza's message was handwritten, steady and warm, and filled with details about Coda's past. Coda was never the loud one, it began. He didn't bark like the others. He didn't chase or whine or beg for treats. But when the dust hit and everything went sideways, he was the one standing over the injured, watching the exits, refusing to leave. We didn't call him a pet. We called him a sentinel. He never forgot who needed him, and he never left his post. At the bottom of the envelope was a small medal, polished silver with the word Valor etched across it, and a photo. In the image, Coda stood proud next to Eliza, both of them looking directly at the camera, but it was Coda's eyes that caught Mira. It was the same gaze he gave Ivy now, alert, steady, all in. Mira sat with Ivy that evening and read the letter aloud. Ivy didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the photo in her lap, running her finger gently along the curve of Coda's face. "He was a hero before," she whispered. "Even before he found me." Mira nodded. "He's been saving people his whole life." That night, Ivy brought the medal to bed with her and set it next to Coda's paw. He didn't react, didn't lift his head. But when she leaned in and kissed his snout, he let out a soft huff, almost like a sigh of thanks. Days later, something else happened. Something Mira could never explain with logic, only with the language of trust. It was evening. The wind had picked up. Ivy was in the yard with a neighbor's dog while Mira prepared dinner. She looked out the window, checked the time, and noticed something odd. Coda was pacing the fence line again, ears forward, body stiff. He wasn't barking, but he kept looking toward the woods behind their home. Mira stepped outside and called him. He ignored her. Then he bolted, not toward Ivy, but around her, toward the other dog. The neighbor's pup, a sprightly beagle named Milo, had wandered too close to the back hedge, where a loose section of fence sat hidden by brush. And on the other side of that gap, a coyote had appeared, low to the ground, teeth bared, moving fast. Coda didn't wait. He shoved past Milo and planted himself between the coyote and the children. There was no growl, no bark, no warning, just posture, strong, unmoving, immovable. The coyote skidded to a halt, confused by the sheer size and certainty of the dog in front of it. It paused, sniffed the air, then slowly backed away, vanishing into the woods. Coda didn't chase. He simply stood there, watching the trees, until Ivy's voice broke the moment. "Coda!" she called, her voice shaking. Only then did he turn and walk back. Later, when everything had calmed, Mira sat beside Coda on the porch and whispered, "You've done enough. You don't have to be the guardian forever." But as she looked down, she realized Coda already knew that. His body was tired. His eyes had softened. But his place beside Ivy, that was his peace. His post wasn't a burden. It was his purpose. And in that moment, Mira finally understood something simple and profound. Coda had never needed words. He didn't need reassurances or thanks. He only needed a place to give his loyalty, to serve without command, to love without limits, and Ivy had given him that. Now he was no longer watching the door. He was watching her grow, and he wasn't guarding out of fear anymore. He was staying because he had finally found home. Coda passed quietly on a Tuesday morning, just before sunrise. Ivy had gone to bed the night before with her hand resting gently on his back, his breathing slow and deep beneath her fingers. Mira had stood in the hallway, watching them through the crack in the door, a soft ache already blooming in her chest. She had known, so had Ryan, and, in her own quiet way, so had Ivy. It had been building for days, the way Coda moved slower, the way his eyes blinked longer before opening, the way he seemed to sigh after every step like his body was ready to stop. But his soul didn't want to leave the child he'd chosen. He was lying at the foot of Ivy's bed, just as he always did. His head was resting on his paws. There was no tension in his muscles, no pain etched across his face. When Ivy woke and sat up, she knew the moment she looked at him. Her breath caught in her throat. She whispered his name once. No answer. She reached out and touched him, still warm, still peaceful, but already gone. Mira heard the silence and came running. But Ivy didn't cry, not yet. She simply held him, pressed her face into the fur between his ears, and stayed there as the light crept in through the window, spreading across the room like a soft goodbye. When Mira reached her, Ivy turned with eyes brimming but steady. He waited for me to sleep, she said quietly, so I wouldn't have to see him go. Mira knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her daughter and the dog that had once been a question mark in their lives. He loved you more than anything, she whispered, and he knew you'd be okay. They buried Coda beneath the old maple tree in the backyard, the same one he had always chosen as his lookout, the one with roots like arms reaching out to hold the earth in place. Ivy picked the spot. Ryan dug the hole himself, slowly, carefully, as if trying not to disturb the ground too harshly. They wrapped Coda in Ivy's old quilt, the one she used to build forts with, the one he had once fallen asleep on when she was sick with the flu and wouldn't stop crying. They laid the silver medal Sergeant Eliza had sent beside his paw, along with the hand-drawn badge Ivy had made during their first spring together. There was no ceremony, just the kind of quiet that says everything. Later that evening, Ivy sat under the tree alone, her legs crossed, a notebook in her lap. She drew silently, line after line. When Mira came out to check on her, she saw a picture forming. A girl with pigtails, hand outstretched, walking through a field, and just beside her, a large dog with kind eyes and a tail that stretched like a ribbon into the sky. He didn't leave, Ivy said without looking up. He just changed places. Mira sat beside her, unable to speak for a moment. The ache inside her was real and heavy, but watching her daughter smile through grief, watching her find light through the space Coda had left behind, it was something stronger than sadness. It was love that had taken root and bloomed even as loss settled in. In the days that followed, the house felt quieter, the kind of quiet that didn't come from absence, but from reverence. There was no barking, no tail thumps on the floorboards, no soft sighs as Coda shifted in his sleep. But there was peace. And peace, Mira realized, was exactly what Coda had given them. He had walked into their lives like a ghost with a duty, a shadow unsure of his place, and somehow, through nothing but presence, he had rewritten their home with loyalty and grace. A month later, the town held a community event honoring service animals. Ivy was asked to speak. She stood on the stage in front of rows of families, her voice quiet but certain, and told the story not of a rescue, but of a bond, of a dog who had once refused to be touched, who had watched from corners and refused to play, and who, in the end, had shown her what love looked like when it needed no words. He didn't save me just once, Ivy said. He saved me every day, in little ways, by just being there, by making me brave. When she stepped off the stage, people clapped. Some cried. One woman with a senior golden retriever hugged Ivy and said, "Your Coda gave me the courage to give my girl another chance." And that was the true gift he'd left behind. Not just a memory, not just a story, but a ripple. A quiet dog with quiet courage who had taught the world that strength isn't always loud, that love doesn't always arrive wagging its tail, and that sometimes the ones who seem distant are simply waiting for the right heart to open. Years later, when Ivy was older, she would still sit under the maple tree with a book in her lap. Sometimes she'd read aloud to no one in particular, Other times she'd rest her hand on the grass like she used to on Koda's back. And every now and then, when the wind blew just right through the branches, she'd close her eyes and smile because she still felt him there, and she always would.